The wind came first, sweeping across the high plains like an old, unkind ghost. It dragged dust from the broken hills, lifted grit into the sky, until the world turned the color of ash. The widow stood beside the wagon, her hair tangled in the wind, her hands raw from the rains. The children huddled beneath the tarp, eyes wide and hollow, their lips cracked white. One clutched a doll missing its head. Another pressed a finger to the wagon floor where a single drop of water had fallen and vanished. The road behind them was nothing but wheel ruts and dry sorrow. Ahead, a fence cut across the horizon, barbed wire glinting faintly in the dying Sunday. The ranch beyond it looked as tired as she did. A low house crouched against the earth, barn leaning under its own memory, windmill groaning. She had not meant to come here. Pride had kept her moving long past reason. But the horse was limping now, and the youngest boy had begun to cough in his sleep. There were no towns for many miles, only this ranch and whatever kind of man kept it. When the rancher first saw her, he thought she was a trick of the light, a phantom blown from the desert. He was mending a gate when the wagon crested the hill, lurching and uneven. For a long moment he did not move. The image called up too many things he had buried: hunger, loss, the sound of someone calling his name from a place he could never return. He wiped his brow, spat into the dust, and walked toward her. "Ma'am," he said when he reached the fence. His voice was low, careful. "You lost?" The widow hesitated. Words seemed heavier than water, now something precious she could not spare. "Not lost," she said at last, her tone brittle. "Just out of places." He studied her for a moment, then looked at the children. The littlest one's face was gray with heat. The rancher's jaw tightened. He had seen death too many times, and he could smell it in the wind now. "You can water your horse at the trough," he said. "There's bread inside if you want it." She didn't thank him, couldn't. Maybe. Pride was all she had left, and even that was threadbare. But she followed, leading the wagon through the gate. Inside the kitchen, the air was cooler, shaded by thick walls and narrow windows. The table was clean but scarred, its surface worn smooth by years of elbows and quiet meals. The rancher set out a loaf of bread, half a pot of beans, a jug of well water. The smell nearly undid her. She felt her knees weaken as she tore the bread apart, giving each child a piece before taking her own. He watched them eat. There was something almost holy in the way the smallest boy lifted his cup with both hands, trembling. "You headed somewhere in particular?" he asked. "Anywhere that'll have us," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "My husband passed last winter. The farm went to the bank soon after. Been traveling since spring." He nodded slowly. The world was full of such stories, too many to count. "You can rest here a bit," he said. "Got plenty of work that needs doing, if you're willing." Her eyes flicked to him, suspicious. Men didn't offer kindness without expecting something in return. But she saw no hunger in his face, only a kind of weariness that matched her own. "Just for a day or two," she said. He nodded again. "A day or two, then." Outside, the sky turned red behind the windmill. The air smelled of dry sage and old iron. The widow sat on the porch later, after the children had fallen asleep, watching the last light fade. The rancher was still out in the yard, checking the fence, his silhouette long and lonely against the earth. She watched the way he moved, slow, deliberate, as if each motion cost him something. When he came back, their eyes met for the first time without words between them. In that look, there was something neither of them could name: recognition, maybe, or the faint echo of grace. He tipped his hat, said good night, and disappeared into the dark. The wind carried on, scraping across the plains. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted in its stall. The widow closed her eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. The morning broke pale and cold. A thin veil of frost stretched over the grass. The widow rose before the sun, moving quietly so as not to wake the children. Her bones ached from sleeping on the hard floor, but she was used to that. She washed her face in the basin, the water biting against her skin, and stepped outside into the sharp dawn air. The rancher was already awake. She saw him near the barn, his breath clouding in the light, his coat buttoned tight. He moved with the same careful rhythm she'd seen the night before, steady, sure, like a man who'd long ago learned that speed was the enemy of endurance. He looked up when she approached. "Coffee's on the stove," he said simply. "I'm fine," she replied, though her hands trembled from hunger and cold. He studied her a moment longer. "Suit yourself." Then he turned back to the horses, brushing frost from their coats. For a while, they worked in silence. She found a broom leaning by the door and began sweeping the porch, though no one had asked her to. The motion steadied her thoughts, gave her something to hold on to. The children were still asleep inside, curled together like small animals seeking warmth. She watched the sun climb the hills, spreading light across the pale fields, and felt something she hadn't in months' stillness. When she finally went inside, the coffee was waiting, steaming in a chipped enamel cup. She hesitated. Then Saturday. The rancher had left a few eggs on the stove, hard-boiled and simple. She ate slowly, careful not to let the children see when they woke. By noon, the oldest boy, Samuel, was outside helping mend a fence. The rancher had handed him a hammer and shown him how to hold a nail steady without losing a thumb. The boy was thin but eager, his face set in a serious frown. The rancher said little, but each time Samuel did something right, he gave a single nod. That seemed to be enough. The widow watched from the porch, her hands folded in her lap. She felt pride and fear tangled in her chest. She had not seen her son smile in many weeks. "Been a while since there was laughter on this land," the rancher said later, standing behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. His voice was quiet, carrying a strange tenderness beneath its gravel. She nodded, unsure what to say. "They're good boys," she murmured. "I can see that." The wind picked up, tugging at her shawl. She pulled it tighter, and he glanced at the thin fabric. "Winter's coming hard this year," he said. "If you're planning to move on, best do it before the snows." "I know." Her voice was low, almost lost in the wind. "Just need a bit more strength in the horse, then we'll be gone." He didn't reply. After a moment, he turned and walked toward the corral. But that night, when she went to the barn for water, she found a new bale of hay set aside for her horse and a handful of oats in a tin. She stood there a long time, staring at the small gift. The next days unfolded slowly. The widow mended torn shirts, scrubbed the floors, baked what little bread she could from his stores. The children ran across the yard, chasing each other until their laughter echoed against the hills. The rancher said little, but he began leaving small tasks for her to find chickens to feed, tools to oil, a fence post that needed straightening. It was his quiet way of giving purpose without pity. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she found him sitting by the trough, whittling a piece of cedar into a small bird. The wood was smooth, the shape delicate under his rough hands. "You carve," she said softly, "only when there's nothing else to fix." He smiled faintly then, the first time she'd seen such a thing. It changed his face, softened it, made him seem almost young again. She took a step closer. "It's beautiful," he shrugged. "Just a habit my father taught me. Said every man ought to know how to give life to something that won't die on him." She looked at the wooden bird, then at his hands. "Did he live long?" "Long enough to see the drought take half the herd," he said. "After that, I guess he lost interest in living." The air between them thickened with silence. She understood. Loss was a language they both spoke. That night, the children slept soundly, and she sat on the porch again, watching the stars. The rancher passed by once, nodded, and went inside. But she noticed the light in his window stayed burning long after the wind died down. Somewhere deep inside her, something small began to thaw. On the fourth day, the first riders came. She saw them before he did. 2 men from town, dust-caked and grinning the way men grin when they are not kind. They rode in easy, without asking, without calling out from the gate. The taller one spit near the porch and looked at her like she was a stray coyote nosing his camp. "Well, I will be," he said, slow, dragging the words. Jessie took in strays. The widow felt heat rise in her throat. She did not answer. Her hands tightened around the wash basin she was carrying. Her fingers had split from work and cold. Blood sat in the cracks like rust. The second man nudged his horse closer to her. "How many you got in there, missus? Looked like 4 little shadows running around when we came up. Jessie running an orphanage now?" They laughed. It was not loud laughter. That was the worst of it. It was quiet, familiar, like they were used to laughing at Jesse, used to thinking of him as something unfinished. She said nothing. She would not give them the shape of her voice. Jesse stepped out of the barn then, wiping his hands on a rag. He did not move fast. He did not raise his voice. He only walked until he stood between her and them. "You boys get lost?" he asked. The taller one chuckled. "Heard talk in town. Figured we ought to see it for ourselves. You feedin' travelers now, Jesse? Widows with young'uns? They settlin' in or just warmin' their feet a spell?" Jesse met his eyes. "Ain't your concern?" "Oh, I think it is," the man said, though his smile had thinned. "See, folks are sayin' you ain't got the money for hired help, but you always did like the feel of charity on your conscience. Took in that old Mexican hand for a winter. Took in that no-good cousin of yours after he busted parole. Now you taken in a woman nobody knows. 4 extra mouths. Town says you gone soft." The widow watched Jesse's jaw work once. Then he said, "Town can say what it pleases. Fence on the south line is down. Either you two get off your horses and lend a hand, or you can ride on back and tell town you got turned away, 'cause you were too sorry to work." The shorter man shifted in his saddle. The taller one laughed again, but it rang false this time. "Hell with this," he muttered, and flicked the reins. "You hear that, Cal?" Jesse Dunn opened himself a soup kitchen. They rode off, spurs flashing in the pale Sunday. For a long moment, there was only the creak of the windmill and the slow pump of her heart in her throat. Jesse didn't turn around right away. When he did, it was only to look at her and say, evenly, "You don't owe them anything. You don't owe anybody explanation." Her voice came out low. "Do I owe you?" He held her gaze. "Owe me? No, ma'am. You work. I work. That's even." She felt something ripple through her then. Not relief. Not yet. But the first outline of safety. Later, when the children were down for rest, she sat by the stove and mended a torn shirt of his. She had done that kind of work for her husband once. Back before the winter sickness took him. Back when she still believed trouble was a thing that lived somewhere else. As her hands moved, she found herself thinking of that last winter. Her husband's cough had started in October, soft and stubborn. By November, he was shaking so hard at night, she thought the bed itself might split. The doctor had come once, left some powder, and a look she did not like. By December, he could not leave the house, and she did the feeding and the chopping and the hauling alone. She remembered the cold in the pump handle so sharp, it numbed her fingers to bone. She remembered breaking ice in the water pail with the heel of her hand while the baby wailed from inside. In January, he was gone. In February, the bank man came up the road in a clean coat and apologized with a mouth that did not know how to mean it. By March, the neighbors had stopped coming by. Pity never lasted. Pity was expensive. In April, she hitched what was left and went. She never let herself remember past that. She had not cried since. Tears had seemed like water she could not justify spilling. Now, sitting in Jesse's kitchen, with the shirt spread across her knees, she felt a tightness in her chest she did not recognize at first. It scared her. She pressed her thumb hard into the fabric until the feeling dulled. Jesse stepped in quiet, set a small sack on the table and said, "You so good." "It's just mending," she replied. "Still," he said. He hesitated, then nudged the sack toward her. "Found these in town some weeks back. Figured I'd keep them for barter, but your girls could use them." She opened the sack. Inside were 2 ribbons, pale blue, frayed but clean. Girl ribbons, Sunday ribbons. Her throat closed. "You bought these?" she whispered. "Traded salt and cartridges for them." "Ain't buying," he said, almost embarrassed. He scratched his jaw. "They ain't much." She shut the sack gently, both hands around it like it might bruise. She could not look at him. The last time anyone had brought something meant only for beauty and not survival. Her husband had still been alive. After a long silence, she said, "Why are you doing this, Jesse?" He did not answer right away. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, gaze on the floor like the words were nailed down there. "House been quiet a long time," he said finally. "Gets so a man can hear his own thoughts in it. After a while, that ain't company." That was all. That night, after the lamps were blown out, after the small bodies of her children had gone slack with sleep, she lay awake on the floor near the stove and listened to the house settle. The wood popped in slow pulses. Wind moved along the eaves. Somewhere in the bunk room down the short hall, Jesse shifted in his bed. She listened to that too. She did not know a man could feel lonely inside his own land. She did not know a man like that would make room. Out on the plains, coyotes called to one another, thin and mournful. The sound carried across the dark like memory. She whispered into that dark, so soft, not even the stove could hear it. We might stay one more day. The next morning came bright, almost tender. The air was washed clean by a night rain that had passed quietly, leaving beads of water along the fence wire and dark circles in the dust. The children ran barefoot through puddles while the widow hung clothes to dry on the line. For the first time in months, laughter didn't sound like trespass. It sounded like life finding its way back. Jesse watched from the barn door, arms folded. The sight of those children chasing the sun across his yard stirred something deep in him, a kind of ache he had forgotten how to name. He'd been alone on that land near 10 years, ever since his brother had died in the flood and the rest of the family scattered west. Since then, he'd lived by the rhythm of animals and weather, by the sound of his own boots on the floorboards. But now the air carried other sounds, a pot clanging, a child's shout, the creak of the rocking chair moving slow across the porch. It unsettled him and comforted him all at once. When the widow saw him watching, she paused, her hand resting on the line. "They'll stay out of the corral," she said. "I told them not to bother the horses." "They're fine," he said. "Ain't hurtin' nothin'. Let 'em be kids." She nodded, though a faint unease touched her eyes. It's been a while since they were allowed to be. He stepped closer then, his boots sinking in the soft ground. "You got a name you care to share?" She hesitated. "Clara," she said finally. "Clara Hensley." He nodded once. Jesse McCord. It was the first time they'd spoken their names. The exchange felt simple, but it hung in the air like a vow. They worked together that day, Jesse mending the south fence, Clara helping patch a leak in the barn roof. She climbed the ladder with ease, surprising him. When he offered to take over, she shook her head. "I've done harder things than this," she said, hammer steady in her hand. The sunlight caught the dust around her, turning it to gold, and for a moment he couldn't look away. At midday, they shared coffee under the cottonwood by the trough. The children dozed in the shade, and the only sound was the lazy hum of flies. Clara glanced at him, her face thoughtful. "You ever think of leaving this place?" she asked. He studied the land, the low hills, the slow sweep of grass moving like water. "No," he said. "The land's all I got that stayed. It's got a way of forgiving what people won't." She looked at him a long time, as if weighing those words. "Maybe that's why we're both still here." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. That evening, the sky burned red again, the wind carrying the smell of rain and wood smoke. Jesse sat sharpening his knife, while Clara stirred beans on the stove. The children whispered near the hearth, telling stories about the stars. It was a simple night, the kind he hadn't known in years, the kind that made him wonder what it would be like to keep it. Later, when the house grew quiet, he walked out to the porch. Clara was there already, wrapped in a blanket, her hair undone. The moon lit her face in pale silver. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "The quiet keeps me awake." He leaned against the post beside her. "Funny. That's what I used to say about the noise." For a time, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and juniper. Then Clara said softly, "Back home, people used to laugh at us. Said my husband was foolish, that he'd never make it through another winter. When he got sick, they stopped laughing. When he died, they started again. Not cruel, just certain. Certain the world had proved them right." Jesse turned toward her. "People like that forget what it costs to keep believing." She nodded, eyes glistening faintly. "You ever lose faith?" He looked out toward the fields. "Every day," he said, "but I still get up. Guess that's a kind of faith, too." She studied him in the moonlight, something quiet and grateful flickering across her face. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe it is." When he went inside, she stayed on the porch, watching the stars fade one by one into dawn. The wind had gone still, the air heavy with promise. Somewhere in the darkness, the faintest trace of peace found her, and for the first time in a long time, she let it stay. The next weeks passed in a rhythm both strange and familiar. Dawn came early. the sky spilling pale light over the hills, and each morning Clara rose before it. She milked the cow, split kindling, set water to boil. Jesse would already be outside, his figure small against the stretching plains, the sound of his axe carrying across the still air. The children began to learn the ways of the ranch, the boys feeding chickens, the girls sweeping the porch, laughter echoing in places that had forgotten it. By the second week, the ranch no longer felt borrowed. It felt lived in. Jesse noticed the changes without meaning to. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread again. The curtains, once dull with dust, had been washed and hung back in place. The porch rail no longer sagged where it had broken last spring. Clara had fixed it herself, a hammer in one hand and her youngest balanced on her hip. He watched her from the yard that day, his chest tight with something that was not quite sorrow and not yet joy. She belonged here. That was the truth that unsettled him most. One afternoon, a storm rolled in sudden and hard from the west. The sky darkened, the air charged and restless. Jesse was in the lower pasture when the first thunder cracked. He turned to see Clara running toward the corral, skirts heavy with rain, the children close behind. She was shouting his name, though the wind tore her voice apart. He reached her just as lightning split the ridge. The horse in the pen had panicked, rearing high, eyes wide with white fear. Clara's eldest son had climbed the gate, trying to open it, but the latch stuck. The horse struck the rail and nearly threw him. Jesse lunged, pulling the boy down and pushing him behind. Then, in the same motion, he caught the halter rope and spoke low, steady, until the animal calmed. The storm screamed around them, rain cold as needles. Clara grabbed her son, pressed his head against her chest. Jesse saw the tremor in her shoulders as she whispered, "It's all right, Samuel. It's all right now." When the thunder finally rolled away and the rain softened, Jesse looked at her, mud on her face, hair plastered to her temples, eyes bright with something fierce and unguarded. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though tears streaked the dirt on her cheeks. "I thought—" She stopped, shook her head. "I thought it would take one of them too." "It didn't," he said. "Not today." They stood there for a long while after, the smell of wet earth thick around them. The children clung to her skirts, shivering, but the fear slowly faded from their eyes. Jesse walked them all back to the house, the storm muttering behind the hills. That night, when the lamps burned low, Clara came to the porch again. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of sage. Jesse was there already, sitting in the old rocker, mending a strap. "I owe you thanks," she said. He didn't look up. "Don't owe me a thing. Boy just needed a hand." Still, she stayed standing there, her hands clasped before her. "It's been a long time since anyone stepped between us and trouble." Jesse looked at her then. "Maybe trouble ain't all you'll have from now on." For a moment she said nothing. Then her voice came quiet, careful. "You speak like a man who's lost something and never stopped looking for it." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." The wind moved through the dry grass, whispering. She took a breath, stepped closer. "And if you found it again?" He set the strap aside. "I'd hold it gentle so it didn't scare off." Her eyes lifted to his, steady. The silence stretched between them, full and trembling. She could feel the warmth from the lamp through the window behind her, could hear her children breathing in their sleep. For the first time, she didn't feel like a trespasser in this life. He looked down, almost shy. "Folks in town'll talk if you stay through winter." "Let them," she said. "They've talked before. It never changed a thing worth keeping." He studied her a long moment, then nodded once, slow. "Then stay, if you're willing." Clara glanced out toward the dark pasture, the hills ghostly under the moonlight. "We'll earn our keep." "I know you will," he said. And that was how the promise began, wordless, built from work and weather and the steady pulse of two hearts that had forgotten how to hope. The next morning, the ranch felt different again. The sun rose clean, gold spilling across the fields, and Clara's laughter carried over the yard like birdsong. Jesse stood at the fence line, hat in hand, watching. He'd fed a widow once out of kindness. Now it was kindness that fed him. Winter came hard. It swept in without mercy, dragging a gray sky behind it, and laying frost on the windows before dawn. The wind howled across the plains like a wounded thing, and even the horses seemed to move slower, their breaths steaming in the cold. Jesse and Clara worked through it, side by side, their hands red and cracked from the cold. The children learned to stack wood, to feed the hens before their water froze, to keep the fire alive through the long nights. Hardship didn't spare them, it never did, but it stopped feeling like punishment. It became a rhythm they moved within, a pulse that stitched them closer each day. Sometimes when the children slept, Clara would sit near the stove, sewing by the dim light of a lantern. Jesse would take his place opposite her, polishing a saddle or mending rope. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It was full now, thick with understanding, with the slow, unspoken forming of trust. One evening, near Christmas, Jesse came in from the barn with snow crusted on his shoulders. He brushed it off and laid something on the table, an old, battered fiddle, the wood polished smooth by time. "Found this in the loft," he said. "Belonged to my mother. She used to play come winter." Clara looked at it, hesitant. "I can't play." "Didn't say you had to." He smiled, rare and quiet. "Just thought the house might remember a sound besides the wind." He tuned it slow, his fingers clumsy at first, then sure. The sound was thin and trembling, but it filled the room, warm and human. The children crept closer, eyes wide. Clara set her sewing aside and watched as the notes rose and broke like waves. When he stopped, the youngest girl clapped her small hands together, and Jesse's laugh, deep, rough, unused, broke loose from somewhere deep. It startled even him. Afterward, Clara poured him coffee and said, "That was the first music we've heard since my husband's funeral." Jesse looked down into the cup. "Then, maybe we ought to make more of it." The snow deepened. Days passed with slow grace. Clara began to move through the house, as though it were hers, and Jesse no longer felt the need to make excuses for it. He fixed a hinge when it squeaked, mended her boots without asking. She repaired his torn coat sleeve, lined it with spare cloth so his arm wouldn't freeze when he worked the fence. But peace never lasted long on the plains. It was near the end of January when a wagon came up the road, a lawman from town. A man named Garrett, his badge catching what little light the day had. Jesse stepped out first, wiping his hands. "Mornin', Sheriff," he said. Garrett tipped his hat but didn't smile. "Morning, Jesse. Heard tell you've been keeping guests out here." Jesse's jaw tightened. "What of it?" Garrett looked past him, toward the house where Clara stood in the doorway, the children clinging to her skirts. "Widow Hensley, I presume?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "Town's been wondering after you," Garrett said. "Bank still holds claim on your husband's land. There's a man down there, Mr. Raymer says you owe him for equipment and feed. He's filed petition to have you returned. Says you left without settling debt." Jesse took a step forward. "She left 'cause the land died. Ain't no debt worth chasing across 50 miles of dirt." Garrett's gaze didn't shift. "The law says otherwise." Clara's face was pale, her hand trembling against the doorframe. "He's lying," she said. "Raymer took the last of our cattle before my husband was even buried. There was nothing left to pay him with." The lawman sighed. "Maybe so. But he's the one with paper and seal." Jesse's voice was low, sharp. "Paper don't make truth." For a long moment, no one moved. Snow fell slow between them, soft as ash. Then Garrett's shoulders eased. "You know I ain't looking for trouble, Jesse. I'll tell Raymer I couldn't find her. But sooner or later, he'll come himself." When the wagon left, the silence it left behind felt colder than the wind. That night, Clara sat near the fire, her eyes hollow. "I can't bring that man's trouble down on you," she whispered. "He's cruel enough to ruin us both." "You think I'm scared of a banker?" Jesse asked. "I think you've already lost enough." He reached out then, his rough hand closing around hers. "So have you. You ain't leaving." She looked at him for a long time. The firelight caught the tears she tried to hide. "And if he comes?" Jesse's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Then he'll learn what kind of man feeds a widow." Outside, the wind rose, fierce and wild, shaking the old windows in their frames. But inside, The world felt still, two souls holding ground against everything that had tried to break them. The next days were restless. The air carried a stillness that felt like waiting. Even the sky seemed to hold its breath, the horizon blanched of color, as though winter itself were listening. Jesse worked longer hours in the pasture, checking fences that didn't need checking, stacking wood that was already stacked. Clara knew it was worry that drove him, the kind that doesn't show in a man's words, only in his hand. Raymer's name hung between them, unspoken but alive. Each evening, Jesse came in with frost on his coat, his beard stiff with ice. Clara would meet him at the door with coffee. The children clustered near the stove. The warmth between them had deepened, grown quiet and certain. It wasn't courtship, not in any way the world would recognize, but it was something sturdier, something that endured. Then, one gray morning, the wind shifted. The sound of hooves came up the road, measured, deliberate. Jesse stepped out before they reached the gate. Two riders. One was Raymer, dressed too fine for the plains, his coat trimmed with fur, his gloves soft and new. The other was Garrett again, though his eyes this time were weary. Raymer smiled when he saw Clara at the porch. "There she is," he said, "the lady of debts unpaid." Jesse stood firm. "You got no place here." "I got every place," Raymer said, voice smooth as oil. "Her husband owed me for 3 years running. I kept him alive through loans, feed, and mercy. When he died, she ran with what little I could have reclaimed. That wagon, those horses, even that kettle in your kitchen, they're mine by right." Clara's voice came hard and steady. "You took more than enough from us, Mr. Raymer. My husband's life, our home, my dignity. How much more you want to bury?" He turned his pale eyes to Jesse. "She's a thief dressed in pity. But I'll tell you what, McCord, you hand her over, and I'll forget the trespass." Garrett shifted in his saddle. "Raymer." "Quiet, Sheriff. You said yourself the law's on my side." Jesse's jaw worked once, slow. "You come onto my land, speak to her that way again, and the law'll need another grave." Raymer's smile faltered. "You threatening me, rancher?" Jesse didn't blink. "Promising." The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Even the horses felt it. Garrett exhaled and dismounted, holding a hand up. "Let's not do this. Raymer, you've made your point. Jesse, you know how this looks." "I know exactly how it looks," Jesse said. "It looks like a man who's tired of watching good folk get stripped to bone by greed." Garrett looked between them, then turned his horse. "I ain't seen her," he said finally. "That's the truth I'll write in my report." Raymer sputtered, his face red. "You can't go home, Raymer," Garrett said. "Before the snow closes the road, you'll get no help here." For a long moment, Raymer didn't move. Then he spat into the snow, turned his horse, and rode off, his pride trailing behind like dust. Jesse watched until they vanished over the rise. Only when the wind carried their sound away did he let the breath leave his chest. Inside, Clara stood frozen, the children huddled behind her. When he stepped through the door, she met his eyes. "You shouldn't have risked that," she whispered. He shrugged. "Ain't risk if it's right." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "No one's ever stood for me before." He looked at her a long time. "Maybe it's time someone did." The words settled between them, warm as the fire. That night, the house was quieter than usual, but not empty. After the children had gone to bed, Clara found Jesse on the porch, staring into the wide dark. Snowflakes drifted slow around him, melting as they touched his coat. She stepped close, her breath fogging the air. "I don't know what we'll do come spring," she said softly. "But if it's work you need, I'll stay. If it's company you want." He turned to her then. "It's both." Her hand trembled where it rested against his sleeve. "Then, you'll have both." He didn't kiss her, didn't need to. Their hands met, rough against rough, the touch small but steady. Below them, the plains stretched wide and silver under the moon, the same land that had buried so many dreams. Yet somehow, standing there, they felt as if they'd reclaimed a piece of it, not through triumph, but through simple endurance. The wind sighed through the fences, carrying the faint scent of cedar smoke and thawing earth. For the first time, Clara thought maybe the world could begin again. Spring crept in slow, like something uncertain of its welcome. The snow retreated in patches, revealing earth bruised and soft beneath. Streams swelled with meltwater, carrying the scent of distant pine. On the McCord Ranch, life began again, not suddenly, but in small, faithful gestures. Calves were born, fences straightened, fields cleared. Each morning, the sun rose a little higher, and the world grew lighter with it. Clara moved through those days as though she belonged to them. Her face, once drawn and gray with hunger, had softened with color. She laughed more easily now, sometimes even at herself. The children had grown sturdy. Their hands knew the rhythm of work and rest. Jesse watched them all with quiet pride. He said little, but his eyes carried the truth of what he felt, that somewhere between survival and solace, they had made a home. One afternoon, he found her in the garden she'd started behind the barn. The soil was dark and rich, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She looked up as he approached, sunlight in her hair, a smudge of earth on her cheek. "You're planting early," he said. "Winter's been long enough," she answered. "I figure the ground's earned a second chance." He smiled faintly. "We all have." She paused, leaning on her spade. "You ever think about what comes next, Jesse? After the thaw?" "Don't rightly know," he said. "Maybe that's the point. Not all things need planning. Some just need tending." She studied him a moment, then nodded. "Then we'll tend what's ours." It was the first time she'd said "we" without hesitation. He felt the words settle deep inside him, like a root finding its hold. That evening, a warm wind rose from the south, carrying the smell of grass and rain. The children played near the corral, their laughter rippling through the dusk. Clara sat on the porch, darning socks by lantern light. Jesse joined her, a cup of coffee in hand. They didn't speak for a while. The quiet between them had grown into something vast and peaceful. After a time, Clara said, "When I first came here, I thought the land was cruel. I thought the wind was trying to take what little I had left. But now I see it was only testing whether I'd stay." Jesse nodded. "The land don't give easy, but once it does, it remembers." She looked out toward the horizon, where the last of the light burned gold along the ridge. "Do you remember, Jesse, who you were before all this?" He thought about that. The man who had once stood alone in the dust, talking to no one, hoping for nothing. "I remember the silence," he said, "and I remember not minding it. That's how I know I've changed." Clara smiled. "Then maybe we both have." The wind lifted her hair, brushing it across her face. Without thinking, Jesse reached out and tucked it behind her ear. His hand lingered there, the roughness of his skin against her warmth. She didn't move away. "There's talk in town," he said finally. "About us." "Let them talk," she whispered. "They can't touch what they don't understand." He looked at her then, the strength in her shoulders, the tenderness that had survived so much loss. "You sure you want to stay tied to this place? To me?" Clara set down her sewing. "You fed me when no one else would. You gave my children a roof, not out of pity, but respect. You think I'd trade that for something easier?" He swallowed hard, the sound rough in the quiet. "You could have a new start somewhere else, somewhere cleaner." "I already have," she said simply. In that moment, the last of the winter between them broke. He took her hand. It was calloused and strong, fingers marked by work. He turned it over, tracing the lines there as though reading a map. "Then I reckon we build something lasting," he murmured. "A place that don't bow to the wind." She nodded, her eyes bright. A home. They sat there as night fell, two silhouettes against the gentle hum of spring. The lantern flickered low, and the stars came out one by one, steady and unhurried. In the barn, a newborn calf let out a thin cry. The world was beginning again in small, beautiful ways. By the time Clara rose to go inside, Jesse caught her hand once more. "Clara," he said softly, "if I asked you to stay for good." She met his gaze, unwavering. "You wouldn't have to ask." And in the silence that followed, the wind carried through the cottonwoods a sound like a promise kept. That night, the plains slept easy. The ranch held its peace. And somewhere in that vast, unending quiet, two souls finally rested, not from weariness, but from finding what they had been searching for all along.